oh, this scale messes people up. Like this can have catastrophic outcomes. Yeah.
Oh, that's horrible. I hate that so much. I'm shocked. When I found that, I was like, no way. Because, it's more
they kept that one quiet.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then to use it on a one-to-one basis at all, when you know the history of the scale, just feels wrong and bizarre.
Let's not let this number or classification define our bodies as problematic or abnormal when our health is otherwise fine. And let's definitely not allow this arbitrary number to make us feel like we're not worthy of care, which I think is a huge problem here.
It's mind-blowing.
Yes. Don't get me, Michael, don't get me too fired up.
Hello and welcome back to the How To Fitness podcast with me, Michael Ujoa.
And me, Kate Lyman.
And we're back with another deep dive. Kate is leading the charge on a really, really cool topic today. This is actually a topic we've wanted to do for a long time, I think. But I'm glad you're doing this one, Kate, because I'm excited to see how your take on it. I know we've probably got similar views on our thoughts on this topic, but I'm excited to see how you put a spin on it.
So all Michael knows is that the topic is BMI.
That's it. Yeah.
And I feel like I took this in a direction maybe different than what you were thinking. I don't know.
No, I like that. That's cool.
I'm excited. So let's do it. Did we get into it? I have nothing to chat about.
Do you know what? No.
We've recorded so many episodes so recently that's like we have nothing to chat about. We've been chatting every moment of every day. Basically.
I know, right? We do. We moan about being tired because we're parents. We chat about work a bit and then we talk about the podcast a lot. I've got my jelly beans at the ready. I've got my water at the ready. I got a little tickly cough, which I'm hoping doesn't come through. But apart from that, I'm excited and ready to go, Kate.
I'm ready.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Okay, so you, Michael, my white European male friend, you are the basis of the BMI scale. It's a scale made for Michael Ujoa, basically.
It is. I was trying to think of like a witty comeback or something, but I can't. Like that's just it.
You don't have one.
I don't have one. I just got to let it lie. Yep.
The initial BMI scale was called the Quetelet Index or Quetelet scale. We're going to talk about BMI today. And there's some parts of this BMI conversation that I think definitely you already know, Michael, but then you as listeners already know quite a lot about. Mostly that BMI is a tool that has some merit when it's used on a population level, but it's flawed on an individual level. But I want to go a little beyond that today because this is a deep dive and that is what we do. And pages of notes are my bread and butter at this point. So I also want to talk about the origins and history of this body mass index formula and what it means for us today. To start, Michael, how are you feeling about this topic? Because I feel like when you do a Q&A, I always see people ask about BMI.
Yeah, it's a topic that I get asked about a lot. If I can give like a quick snapshot, a population tool that's used incorrectly, I think is the best way that I usually answer it in a very quick story response. But I know there's so much more behind the scenes that we could delve into. But yeah, I think on a population scale, it shows trends of what the likelihood might be of someone maybe showing health issues. But on an individual basis, there's just so much variance that it's just not the best tool to use one-on-one.
Absolutely. I know that it works on a population level. I went to school in public health. I took a lot of epidemiology, but it wasn't my strong suit. I did not do well in epidemiology. I mean, I got okay grades. So my brain was not okay. I wish I could go deeper into like how it works on a population scale and stuff. But like the second I left school and could leave epidemiology, I left that stuff behind. It doesn't.
Slammed the door and ran.
It no longer resides in my brain. I feel the same. Plus a little more now that I know a little more. So the impetus for this episode was that I recently finished a book, and I told you about this, Michael, because I finished it last week, called All in Her Head by Elizabeth Coleman. She's a MD. She's not in colleges, actually.
I've just ordered it, actually. I think it should be here imminently, so I'm going to read it.
I think you will like it. It was my first book of 2025, and it has really stuck with me. It's really, really stuck with me. So it's all about the origins of early medicine and the impact on women's health and basically the biases that still exist today. Highly recommend. Very good if you work with women, very good if you are a woman, very good if you know women. So that's everyone. I will say like it was kind of started slow. The first 2 chapters I was like, I don't know about this. And then it got really good. But there was a section in there at one point on BMI and I bookmarked it, but I had borrowed it from the library, a digital copy. And now I can't get it back. I'm still waitlisted and I can't see my bookmark. Okay. So like that was the impetus for this whole episode, but I can't find my reference.
Ah, that's so
annoying. I had to just
do
without. But if anyone reads it and remembers what that part was, let me know and we could talk about it. Yeah.
I'll read it shortly, Kate. I will send you it. I'll send you the BMI section.
Perfect. Okay. So let's dig into where this BMI scale, body mass index scale, even came from, because I think it's going to surprise you. Do you know anything about the history of this scale, Michael?
No, I actually don't, really badly.
I mean, I didn't either.
Much.
So
No. Okay.
I don't know why you would, but
makes me feel better. Okay.
yeah, it was not created by a doctor.
That doesn't surprise me.
Right. It wasn't created to measure health. Also kind of not surprising, right? And it wasn't called the body mass index until about 50 years ago. So this formula of weight in kilos divided by height in meters squared was created by a Belgian mathematician and statistician, Adolf Quetelet, back in the 1830s. Do you ever watch those YouTubes of how to pronounce a name?
Yeah.
You know, that guy, like Julian or whatever her name is? Yeah, I had to look it up because I was like, I think this is French, but how would I know? Anyway, Quetelet is what the YouTube said. The intention wasn't actually measuring body composition or gauging health, but it was his work in this area of social physics to study the characteristics of the average man. So Quetelet was trying to understand.
There it is.
There it is. Quetelet was trying to understand general human population traits rather than measure individual health. Like, individual health was nowhere in the scope of what he was trying to do. And his interest stemmed from believing that finding this average man was the epitome of health, beauty, and morality. Gross. Gross.
That is really, really gross.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Quetelet did not intend for his formula to be used for individuals. And he definitely, like I said, wasn't trying to assess health or obesity. I don't think that was even like on the map at that time. But his intent was always for statistics at the population level. And he really created this Quetelet scale to understand the distribution of body types across the population. Still, like, okay, that's like a more pure intention, I guess, and how we use it today. But like, there were still some major limitations, mainly that all of his participants used to create this formula were Western European men.
There we
you,
go.
Michael,
Yeah.
you.
Yep.
So I looked and I couldn't find any suggestions that Quetelet himself was a eugenicist, which is good. But his work most definitely laid the groundwork for others to classify individuals into categories like normal and abnormal. And his use of the classification of an average individual was then used to justify both racial and biological hierarchies throughout the 19th and 20th century, when the so very disgusting pseudoscience of eugenics was at its peak.
This guy
also gross.
Would have been an Andrew Tate fan, let's be honest.
I mean, probably.
Yeah.
Probably. So how do we get here now, where BMI is used as a screening tool, sometimes really incorrectly as a diagnostic tool, even though we know it has a ton of flaws and that it wasn't its original purpose or intention at all? Not surprisingly, this precursor to BMI, as we know it, goes back to some pretty problematic roots connected to the insurance industry. And this is where I was like, ooh, I did not know this. I did not know we were going here, but I don't like it. So early 1900s, this is, several decades after Quetelet, insurance companies created standard weight tables based on the weights of white policyholders they deemed healthy enough to insure. They didn't talk about race, but figures like Charles Davenport, who was a very notably outspoken eugenicist, still used these tables to make racialized claims about obesity. He tied body weight to supposed racial hierarchies. And then by the mid-1900s, the medical community shifted its focus to tracking all bodies of all races using these weight tables, which kind of only deepened this bias towards this white standard. In 1951, two individuals, Donald Armstrong, Lewis Dublin, they were both connected to Metropolitan Life Insurance. They published a paper labeling obesity as a serious health hazard. The paper was literally called Obesity and Its Relation to Health and Disease. And the first author, Armstrong, he was a physician, but the second author was like just a VP at MetLife, which is this massive insurer. He like literally was a VP at the insurance company. And their definition of obesity was based on these MetLife tables, which were again based on data from mostly white middle class men. So there was like so minimal like scientifically sound information in this article, but it was really clung to by a lot of people, and these ideas started gaining traction. So they even went so far to say that overeating was to blame for 95% of obesity cases, which we know just absolutely isn't true. In general, it was a huge oversimplification, and it helped set this stage for weight standards that we see today with this arguably very whitewashed view of health and really aren't rooted in much science, like at all. So this stuff I'm talking about with the insurance companies, they weren't using BMI. That was kind of separate. It was a precursor to where we are today, but they created these weight tables that were clung to very, we were grasping to insure or not insure people.
It's no surprise that a health insurance company were kind of at the forefront of this. We could take this down so many routes. This is just problematic on every single level.
Yeah. At this time, when scientists were just starting to study obesity as a public health issue, a researcher named Ansel Keys and his colleagues started demonstrating that BMI correlated with body fat. Now, I would not expect anyone to know the name Ansel Keys. I definitely didn't, but I did learn that we know a little bit about his work because he was the lead researcher on the Minnesota starvation experiment. We know about the Minnesota starvation experiment. And in reading a little bit more about him, he was, to put it kindly, very, very judgmental towards people in larger bodies.
I mean, yeah, you have to be really to kind of be the lead on that kind of research.
Yeah, his fat-phobic remarks, which are seen all across his work, are like disgusting and kind of horrifying. I'm not repeating any of them here because they have no place, but horrifying. And it was in this 1972 paper that Keys basically popularized BMI as a screening tool. And that wasn't that long ago. 1972?
It's recent.
It feels recent. Yeah. And the scientific community pretty much grasped onto BMI as a convenient and low cost way to assess obesity and related risks on a larger scale. And it didn't take off right away, but in 1985, the NHANES started to blend those practices of the percentile based range of acceptable, what we're talking about with the insurance company, with the BMI. And that's how we got these categories that we now know of: underweight, normal weight, overweight, obese. That's all of it. Yeah. That's the history. It's wild because it's all founded in this one Belgian mathematician's one study on a bunch of white men.
And oh my, wow. Okay, so I'm trying to think where to start to comment on this. This is wild. So the guy that started it, mathematician, right? Is this literally the exact same scale we use today? Has it altered in any way?
So it's not the scale, it's the formula. Quetelet created weight in kilos divided by height in meters squared. Same exact formula. Nothing has changed about the formula. So
nothing's changed from that at all? Okay.
Nothing. Okay. And then the insurance company came in and made kind of weight categories. They weren't using the BMI formula, the Quetelet formula. Okay. They were using, oh my gosh, I didn't even add it in because it was so convoluted. It was something about percentage of weight off from this optimal weight they deemed, and something about your height. I don't know. It was a messier version. And so those two things, these weight tables from the insurance companies and this formula from Quetelet, kind of married together to become
just a problematic little couple. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Basically, Ansel Keys renamed Quetelet scale as BMI. He was now it's called body mass index, this formula. And now we're going to use it in these categories to determine obesity and health outcomes.
That's wild. Okay.
Yeah. Pretty iffy history there. Pretty icky start. I mean, we can recognize that in 1830, that made sense, what he was doing, I guess. I mean, I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it wasn't I'm going to use this. This information is going to be the basis of how we measure weight and health for centuries to come. Right? That's just wild. I don't know.
Yeah, it just shouldn't have been. I know it shouldn't have been. Yeah. Point blank.
So that's kind of a bit on the history, but I want to talk about where BMI really lets us down. Not just where it falls short on an individual basis, but where these pretty exclusionary routes now lead to the misdiagnosis of many people, especially women and especially people of color. So I'm sure that listeners, you already know about the main limitations of BMI. BMI does not account for factors like muscle mass, bone density, fat distribution, metabolic health. We see that manifest in certain scenarios like athletes with high muscle mass who are then categorized as overweight or obese when they just have more muscle mass and less body fat. And we also see that in scenarios like older adults with low muscle mass who may fall in the category of normal but carry significant health risks like osteoporosis or higher risk of disease without that protection of more muscle mass, more bone density. And those are real common scenarios. And I feel like anyone listening has probably heard like that often tossed around example about an elite athlete incorrectly categorized as overweight or obese. Like, we know that. That's really simplistic. You can probably look at that individual and recognize the discrepancy here is that they have a lot of muscle mass and they're probably fine, right? Like, that's a simplified version of the issue here, I think. The bigger, more detrimental flaw is that there are natural differences in body types between those of different ethnicity, different sex, different ages. And because the BMI thresholds and categories are based on data from basically an entirely exclusively male European population, this scale does not accurately reflect body composition and health risks in anyone else. Anyone else.
Yeah, it's so true. I kind of want to just bring in a story here as well. So I also, another point on that, I'm statistically from the BMI scale, I'm sat in the overweight, near obese category, which always kind of makes me laugh. I remember I went to the doctors in the UK when you join a new like general practitioners, they will do like a quick health screening. And I remember the doctor kind of talking to me through it after looking at the scale and being like, oh, you're kind of a bit overweight, but we'll kind of just ignore that. It was a little bit awkward, right?
Yeah.
But I've had clients who I've worked with in the past who, there's one story here, I won't name her, but she's become a very good friend of mine now. And she was training fantastically, incredibly strong woman, really, really fit. She was going to go through the process of IVF. She was one of the strongest and fittest people that I trained, but she was over the BMI scale to be able to qualify for IVF. So we had to adopt all these really kind of disordered, restricting eating behaviors to drop her body weight, which was making her probably unhealthier than she was then, just so that she could kind of fit on the scale and then qualify to start IVF process. And that was just like one of the first like major issues I had with the BMI scale. I've always like felt like, oh, this is a bit gross and there's things wrong with it. But that was my first hand experience of like, oh, this scale messes people up. Like this can have catastrophic outcomes. Yeah.
Oh, that's horrible. I hate that so much. You know, I talked about the book being kind of the reason why I wanted to delve into this topic, but just last week I was on a call with someone. I kind of already decided I wanted this topic, and her goal was like get into normal BMI range. And we had a really good conversation because I was like, okay, I actually went to a calculator and I looked, and if you lose 0.5 pounds, you will be in this range. Is that what will make you happy? You know, but like it wasn't, because she wanted to get stronger. She wanted to feel better. She was in her 60s and we had a good conversation. I was like, you have to let go of this number, you know? I didn't say that. We talked about it in a really productive way. But yeah, if you're holding on to this idea of this categorization as normal, as somewhere you need to be, we're missing the forest for the trees, basically.
Yeah, it just completely puts the emphasis in the place you don't want it to be, right? It's really frustrating, yeah.
I feel like someone could listen and call this like a woke topic. Maybe like woke propaganda. Actually, if someone thinks that,
I'll wear it as a badge of honor, right?
They've probably already stopped listening.
Yeah, that's true.
But what I can tell you with confidence is like, I'm not delving into this topic just to like call it racist and move on. Like, I want to talk about BMI because it can absolutely positively lead to weight stigma, and it can lead to the misclassification of health issues, and it can result in people with higher BMI being denied insurance coverage like you just talked about, or being incorrectly diagnosed, or having their health concerns ignored because they fall into this arbitrary category that's been calculated with like literally zero concern for their specific ethnicity or gender or age. And I think we can say this with confidence, those with higher BMI are feeling these consequences of these limitations more than anyone else. And it's so problematic. BMI cannot differentiate between visceral fat, the fat that sits around our organs, and it's very much linked to higher health risks, and subcutaneous fat, which is less harmful. And a recent study actually just examined subjects' BMI in relation to their blood pressure, cholesterol levels, and insulin resistance. And nearly a third of the people with normal BMI had unhealthy metabolic metrics. And then about half of those who were technically overweight were metabolically healthy. A quarter of those who were obese had healthy metabolic metrics as well.
There it is.
There it is. And here's where it feels like BMI is perpetuating weight stigma and kind of feels like the opposite of caring about health, does it not? This is the opposite of focusing in on someone's health. I know, Michael, you and I have talked about doing a health at every size episode, but I feel like some of this conversation on BMI is a bit of the root of the HAZE movement, which at its core is about the fact that individuals can be metabolically healthy at any size, regardless of weight or BMI. So we'll save that for another day because I know we want to talk about that later in a different capacity. But let's talk a little bit more about what some of the research says, because here's where I found it really helpful and where we're not just saying, oh my gosh, BMI is racist, BMI is sexist, which it is, but we're saying, here's what the data shows us. Now, a lot of what I read was from a professor named Sabrina Strings. She's chair of Black Studies at University of California, Santa Barbara, and she is a very published author with not only several award-winning books. One of them, which is now on my list, is called Fearing the Black Body, The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia. I got it on hold at the library now, which talks a lot about BMI, but also she's published quite a few scientific papers. So in her work, she found that there are nearly no studies to date examining the relationship between BMI and rates of chronic illness by race or gender. So it's not just like, okay, here's this problematic scale. It's like we've accepted it and then decided not to look any further into it whatsoever. And she and her research team combed through 20 years of NHANES data and found a very weak link between BMI and type 2 diabetes for Black women and Latina women. And in fact, Black women who are between 31 and 33 BMI, which is the obesity class 1 categorization, tend to have better health status, even at that level above 30, than other women or men of lower BMI.
Wow.
But what about now when this person with a higher BMI, but healthy metabolic markers, is denied insurance coverage or life insurance because of their BMI alone? I do think, and I couldn't find a very clear answer on this because I think it all differs insurance company to insurance company. I think they do take into account other metrics. It's not like BMI is the only thing we're looking at, but it's definitely moving the needle. I mean, listen to the story you just gave about the IVF and your client. Like that right there was all we need, you know?
Yeah, I know. And the fact that you say they're like the only thing they take into account, I'm sure some companies probably do. Like it's like, you're above this scale, therefore, no, you're not getting it. But the fact that it is taken into account, do you know?
Yeah.
Like if it's a population-wide tool, cool, like use it as a population-wide tool to look at trends and leave it there if that's how you want to use it. But then to use it on a one-to-one basis at all, when you know the history of the scale, just feels wrong and bizarre.
Yeah. So Dr. String said, or says in one of her studies, that while studies suggest both women and men face weight stigma, a number of studies suggest women are more likely to be stigmatized by obesity science, which doesn't feel surprising at all. And then within this group, Black women bear the brunt of fat phobia. Again, not surprising, but very upsetting. According to Dr. Strings, the over-reliance on BMI has contributed to the stigmatization of fat people, potentially leading to worse health outcomes. These may stem from a lack of ongoing health care if patients avoid returning to the doctor, which is reasonable, negative health consequences that result from weight cycling or yo-yo dieting, and even missed underlying issues due to a too strong focus on BMI. And you hear stories of this all the time.
All the time.
A woman goes in to the doctor for real health concerns and the suggestion is lose weight, lose weight, lose weight. It happens to men too.
Yeah. I think I have a conversation with like at least one person a week through social media coming to me with that issue of kind of being to their doctor for some issue that they're going for, and their weight is the focus, even though that's not what they are there for.
Right. That book, All in Her Head, talks so much about that. It shares a lot of different anecdotes. So we see how this heavy reliance on defining obesity and health, for that matter, on BMI tends to overestimate risk in Black populations, but it also underestimates for other populations, specifically those of Asian descent, because again, different body types, right? I find this exceptionally upsetting as well. Another population who may not receive care due to BMI is those with eating disorders, as insurers often use BMI to make decisions about coverage and limit treatment to those classified as underweight, even though we know someone can absolutely be battling an eating disorder at any weight. It's just, that is like so upsetting to me, so horrifying.
I was just going to say, this is on topic, but slightly off topic, is it still blows my mind in the US. So I know that a lot of our listeners are UK based, so they're probably sharing the confusion here as well in the fact that a doctor can diagnose and ask for a certain route, and then insurers who are not qualified can say, no, this isn't what you need. It still blows my mind that there's in any way in this world that this is the process that we have fallen upon as a way to kind of help improve the health of society, right? It's mind-blowing.
Yes. Like, don't get me, like, Michael, don't get me too fired up. I was trying to keep
I
this
know.
episode shorter.
I'm sorry. But yeah, and also like there's people in this country that want us to follow that route of healthcare, and it's still just, it terrifies me. It terrifies me that anyone would see how it's working in the US and think, yeah, that's the ticket. That's how we should.
We're doing
that's
real
what we should
great over there.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
so what do we do about all of this? Now, here's a little happy note, I guess, in the midst of all of this kind of bad news. In 2023, the American Medical Association basically put out this statement straight up calling BMI racist. I'm shocked. When I found that, I was like, no way. Because, it's more
they
like
kept that one quiet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Its more diplomatic answer was recognizing issues with using BMI as a measurement due to its historical harm, its use for racist exclusion, and because BMI is based primarily on data collected from previous generations of non-Hispanic white populations. But it's pretty good. They basically said that, right? And we can talk about this and the problems here, and at the same time, we can recognize that BMI is low cost and easy and accessible. So when people make suggestions like body composition tests for everyone, or even like caliper tests, like on a large scale, that's probably not feasible. But here's some of the general recommendations I'm seeing around shifting away from heavy use of BMI, because I wanted to come into this episode like, what do we actually do about this?
Yeah,
right?
I was trying to think, like, right, they've released that statement, but like, what's next?
Right. So one is using waist circumference, which is a very simple metric to obtain and gives far more insight into the potential markers of health, because we talked about that, right? Difference between visceral and subcutaneous fat. I think that is very viable, and it could go hand in hand with all these other metrics, right? Basically, if BMI was still used, then weight circumference could be used on top of that to kind of add some context. Then the World Health Organization and National Institutes of Health recommended different BMI cutoffs for overweight and obesity for different ethnic groups. And I think that's a good start as well, because we have to recognize, again, low cost, simple, accessible. That matters when it comes to screening. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to use a scale that has evidence on the population that you're using it with, right? Like, that feels like a bit of a no-brainer.
It's wild because in science, you have to work so hard to validate a scale. Like that, there's so much effort put in validating a scale. I guess BMI isn't a scale, it's a formula. Maybe I'm like, how does it not get the same treatment? It's been around for a long time. But here's my personal recommendation. And something that I hope we can take away from this episode, and kind of my purpose on talking about this topic in general, is we don't need to rail on BMI incessantly, and like a massive overhaul to the medical and insurance systems, well, very warranted, like probably isn't going to happen, right? It's probably not going to happen. But knowing this information, recognizing these limitations and the harmful history behind these very arbitrary measures of health can help us see our own health as multifaceted. And that can help us let go of weight as a defining factor in assessing our own health. I think of that client I talked to last week. Like, with this information, can we let go of I want to be in the normal range of BMI as something that even exists in our mind, because it doesn't matter and it doesn't actually have any impact on our health, right? Like, let's not let this number or classification define our bodies as problematic or abnormal when our health is otherwise fine. And let's definitely not allow this arbitrary number to make us feel like we're not worthy of care, which I think is a huge problem here.
I really like that. I think there's kind of two camps you have to talk to, isn't there, if you're giving advice around how to navigate this. You've got the person who hasn't been told they got any health issues. They're just thinking like, right, I want to make some changes in regards to my health. Then it's quite easy for us to be like, right, just ignore the BMI scale. Let's put the emphasis where it needs to be on like healthy habits and all the not boring, but fun, sexy stuff. Me and Kate always talk about, like walking and drinking water. But then I guess you've got the group who are trying to navigate a healthcare system that is based upon BMI scale, and trying to get anywhere around that is really difficult / not happening. Like, how do we arm these people with the tools to be able to advocate for themselves? And I don't think we have an answer for that because it is so difficult. I mean, as you said, like, we can arm ourselves with the knowledge so that when we are met with these people or these systems that are telling us that, no, that you have to do this first, we can maybe fight our corner a little bit more. Not that it should be that person's fight to fight. I do think that being empowered and having the knowledge around why these things are actually a load of shit, let's be honest, hopefully can be quite powerful. Maybe I'm being slightly optimistic there, but I hope that it can be.
I hope so too. And something I talk about so often with my clients is, when it comes to conversations around weight, and I think BMI falls into the same category, let's work to get to a point where this number doesn't matter to us. But it's hard work to get there when it has meant a lot for a long time because everyone has told us it has. I feel like some of this information, holding it, acknowledging it, thinking about it, helps us get a little farther to that point where this isn't defining us. Again, maybe it's too optimistic. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I knew it was bad, but I didn't know it came from that place kind of bad,
Yeah.
All companies are going to want to use a scale, right? There's going to be a tool that they're going to want to use to be able to measure people against. So at least I hope that we can find the demographics to get the scales that are going to represent them better. Like that's got to be like a bare minimum, right? Like that has to be the minimum. And how hasn't that happened yet? Like this was created in the 70s. Like how have we not at least got to a point where we're using that demographic when we're giving them health advice?
I literally don't know. And that's what I thought about this whole time. Like, are you kidding me? And when Dr. String said, I think she said, like, there's basically no studies validating this scale or this use, this formula, whatever, in different populations. I'm like,
so why are we using it? Yeah.
I do this all the time in my business. I have like a web page or something that's really bad. And I just like, because it exists already, I'm like, I got so many other things to do. And then I go back and I'm like, wow,
I should have done this.
I should have done this.
Yeah.
That seems like what the scientific and health community is doing with BMI.
Yeah.
But they're talking about the whole world. And I'm just talking about a web page on my website. So
yeah. And let's be honest, the
one's
people
a little more impactful.
kind of wanting the system to stay the way that it is.
Exactly.
The straight white man who this scale is kind of works for in a way, maybe, so what a surprise.
Yeah, right. What a surprise. Well,
yeah.
Thank you for indulging me on this topic. I really did learn a lot, and I think it just made me angrier. So
yeah, there we go. Well, we both feel worse, so I hope everyone listening
enjoyed. Keep following along.
No, that was cool. Thank you so much, Kate. I'm glad that we did this topic because I'm glad that I can now come into these arguments a little bit better informed, which is always our goal, right, for all the listeners. So once again, we are doing these for YouTube as well. So if you want to watch along whilst you listen to these episodes, then you should watch us on YouTube. But Kate, thank you so much. As always, that was awesome.
Yep. Thank you, everybody. And make sure to like, subscribe, follow all the things. And we'll see you in 2 weeks.
See ya.